A new system has just been introduced into Exedra that both allows you to perfectly customize your characters how you want, but also gives you long-term goals for the next few months to work towards. So let's figure out how it works. So first off, in the upgrade system menu, there is now a extra button right here for the Crystalis quests, and we see here 6 different windows, one for each element. And the very first question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the difference between all of these different element windows right here? Well, we have done some testing, and as we currently believe it to be, there's only one difference, which is that, well, there are some Crystalis gems that increase the damage that a certain element does. For example, there are gems that increase the amount of aqua damage that you do, and these gems only drop on that corresponding element. So aqua, if you want aqua damage up gems, you do the aqua element window. That is basically the difference here, and as far as we know, that's the only difference. Although there is kind of a second difference, which is that the enemies that you fight in here will have different weaknesses themselves. So if you want to farm faster, you might want to pick a window where the enemies are weak to what characters you have, so that will make it easier to kill these enemies. For example, I have a Homura, and Homura, of course, wants her dark damage gem, so of course I'm going to put her on the dark element quest right here. But even if she didn't want that gem, since the enemy is dark weak and Homura is really able to kill all those dark weak enemies very fast, I would still farm this one right here, because dark weak, dark attacker, that's basically it. And that's basically the only difference, really. So now that we understood the actual difference between these individual ones, let's say we select a quest, we go all the way to the highest difficulties, which has the best drop rates for all the gems that you can get, specifically the higher rarity gems. So now I want to get some gems. So you go in here, you select a team, and the first thing to watch out for is that every single character that's on this team will have a chance to get one of those Crystalis gems for themselves, but only for themselves. You don't have a giant pool of Crystalis gems that you can dish out between all your individual characters. Each character has to receive and then use their own gems. That's how that works. So we want to give gems to these 5 characters, so we pick these 5 characters and then we just go and do one of the battles. So this is just a very simple battle against 3 enemies, so I'm just going to very quickly skip to the end of this battle. There we go, that took about only a minute because this team is pretty strong. So when the fight ends, you then see that you get drops. Now every character, like I said, has to drop their own gem, so you can see that every character either got a gem or didn't get a gem, and then on top of that, if they get a gem that they already had, it actually gets converted into some materials, and we'll see what those materials do. But this also shows that every character can only have one of each type of gem. Okay, and then you also get some regular drops right here of this material, and if you have the Exedra Pass active, you will get bonus drops as well. But the Exedra Pass only gives you bonus materials here. They do not give you bonus of these Crystalis gems themselves, so the rates are still unaffected by that. So now that we've gotten some Crystalis gems, let's take a look at our characters again in the party window, and we see right here that they all have these icons right here now next to their character, and we also can go into this menu where we have a different tab that shows the Crystalis tab. Now every single character first starts out having only one of these active, but you can unlock more slots for your Crystalis gems by spending these things called Petal Shine Pictures, and these ones you gain from simply playing the game's various events such as Score Attack, Tower, Login events, the story event with their story event shops or whatever. Basically all of these different places, they give you these pictures now, and you can spend some of them to unlock additional slots for Crystalis gems. So let's say, for example, we go here and we say, okay, our Homura wants to equip some Crystalis gems. We have done some quests with her, which means that she has gotten some of those gems. So we can click right here on set, and we can go and select one of the Crystalis gems to give her. So like I said, you can see right here, you can only have one of each. So I have Vitality Plus, for example. If I were to drop an additional Vitality Plus in a stage, I can't have a second one, so it would just get destroyed. That said, you can have different ones of different rarities, of course. So here's Vitality Plus Plus, which I also have, so you can have them with different different rarities as well. Keep one thing in mind though, you cannot equip 2 of the same stat type, right? Or in this sense, the ones that have the same name in this sense. So this name is Vitality. So if I were to, for example, equip this one, Vitality Plus, and then I tried to also equip this one, you can see, oh, I can't. They have the same ability name, so I can't do that, right? Because they both are Vitality. but that doesn't mean you can't have the same amount of stats. For example, I have one here that is 25% attack, and this one is just 75 attack. It's not technically the exact same thing, so you can use both of them, right? Only the ones that are really the exact same thing, just of different rarities. You can't equip both of those. That's one thing to note. Now you also see that they have some secondary boost effects. And you also see that this blue one only has one boost effect, this purple one has 2 boost effects, and the yellow ones have 3 boost effects. Now I also have an EX crystal on another character. That one also has 3 slots for boost effects. So right here, for example, you can see that I have also 3 slots on the EX crystal. And EX is the highest rarity of crystal that you can get, and it seems like the drop rate per battle is about 1% for someone to get an EX. So it's somewhere around 1% per battle to get an EX on someone, on anyone. So you might have to do about 100 battles between seeing an EX, or more or less, depending on how lucky or unlucky you are. Keep in mind, you can get 2 of the same EX to drop, and if that happens, because you can't have 2 of the same gem, the second EX that you get, if it's the same one for the same character, it will just get turned into materials, sadly, so you can't actually equip 2 of the same EX for the same character. Now these EX crystals, they're very, very special, because every character only has a single EX crystal they can even get, and that EX crystal will have a special effect that is particular just to that very character. So this effect right here, that is specifically Mummy's EX crystal. No other character has this one, which means that now also for every single character that you might want to build, you might have to look up what that character's EX crystal is to figure out if it's worth trying to farm for their EX crystal and how important that is for them. Mummy's one is really good, for example, but for example the one of Cool Homura or Pluvia Madoka or Kirika, those are actually really bad. Those are actually pretty darn bad. Why? Because these characters are already really good, so giving them bad EX crystals makes them more balanced with other characters that get much better EX crystals, for example. For example, Yachio gets extremely good EX crystal. She gets about 20% crit rate or something, which is insane. On top of that, she gets like 15% speed whenever she crits, which is all the time. So yeah, that's pretty darn good. Madokami also has some really good EX. I'm not going to make a video about all of these different EX ones, but I will link in the description a list, hopefully, of all of the different EX effects, if I can find one. But generally, you can look these up at some point, because people are going to basically accumulate all of this information and put it up on the wiki probably. So if you go to the Exedra wiki, not the fandom one, but just exedra.wiki, you will hopefully find the EX crystal for every single character lined up either on its own page or on next to the character. So now that we have the EX crystals and we have other crystals as well, what do we do now? Well, like I said, we can set them, and if we set them, it's active. Now currently, there is sadly a problem with this, where if you were to now try and set a different crystal, it would actually destroy the old crystal. So if I were to now put something else into this slot where the EX crystal is, that EX crystal would be permanently destroyed until I go back into the battles and I just get another one dropped for me, which, you know, might take a long time. And so that's kind of bad. That's kind of really, really bad. But I hope that with so many people already angrily shouting at the developers for this, that they are changing that, because so far, whenever the community has been really angry about something, the developers have changed it somewhat quickly. So here's to hoping that if you're watching this video in like a month from now or 2, that this has already been changed, that you can actually swap between them. Because one of the best ways that you can use this system is, if the gems didn't break, you can then actually make your own builds for each character. You say, okay, I want my character to be more focused on single target, and then for this next fight I want to switch some stuff around for it to be more about multi-target, or I want to have them fast, and maybe I want to have them have higher defense or whatever. I think that would make the system much better, but right now that is not possible because gems break whenever you unequip them, sadly. So once you have one equipped and you have one in these slots, then you will see you have your substat slots right here, which are 3 in case of EX and the yellow ones, for example. And there's this button right here. Now, if you don't have any effects at all in here, then this will just be empty, and you will have to press this button to just gain some effects. So I've already done that, of course. So I have some 3 effects right here. And these ones are completely random. And I don't actually like these effects that much. I would really like to have more speed, for example. So you can spend some of these resources, and these are the resources that are dropped from doing these upgrade quests, but also the resources that you get if you have a duplicate of the gems that you get dropped in those upgrade battles. So you can also get these from various event bonuses, login bonuses. Basically every single place you can gain anything, you can also gain these drops. So you will have a lot of these the longer you play the game. So now that I have a lot of these, I can say, okay, I want more speed, so let's just press the reroll button, and you'll see, okay, you now have different effects. And these individual effects that are in here all have different strengths, basically. Similar to how it actually was in Star Rail and Genshin and all those. Like, for example, attack +7 is not that good, but 3% debuff rate is pretty darn good, because if I were to look up the list, and this is also something I'm going to list in the description, a list of all of the different main stat crystals there are and all of the different substats there are. Look at, for example, for attack. Attack can go all the way from +6 to +60. So +7 is really bad. But if I were to look at the debuff hit rate, that one goes all the way from 1% to only 8%. And 3% is actually somewhere in the middle because there's some jumps that happen later on. So yeah, that's basically what you can look at and see how well that effect actually has rolled. But you don't actually need to look at the list specifically, because you can see there's some purple bordering behind here. And the purple border shows you this is a pretty decent effect. And if this border becomes yellow, that means, oh, you rolled really, really well on this one. And if it's like both gold and like sparkly or whatever, then it tells you that this is the best you can possibly get. And I think this one can go all the way to 5%. So this is almost the best one, because this goes to 5%, the debuff hit rate, instead of 4.5%. This is the best one you can get. For example, for crit rate. For crit rate, the best you can get is 5%, so it's like all golden and shiny and everything, and you can see, oh, this is a really good one. Compared to the critical damage right here, which doesn't have a colored border at all, so you know it didn't roll that well. Now let's say, for example, you have rolled something really good, and you would like to roll some more, but isn't it kind of sad that you would lose this effect when rolling some more, right? That's kind of sad. So I can do something different. I can say, for example, okay, I want to actually keep this effect. So you can also gain these drop logs right here, which are kind of rare, but also are gained through various event bonuses and stuff like that, where you can spend one of these items right here to do this, where you lock one of these. And now, if I press this reload button, I will still keep the debuff resistance, and only the other effect will be locked. And that's one way of keeping your effects around. As you can see right here, you can even lock 2 at once. So theoretically, if you have a lot of these drop locks, you could actually keep rerolling until you get a really good one, like a max roll on whatever you want, then lock it, and then keep rerolling again. And then when you get a second one that's really good, you lock that one, and then keep rerolling until you have all 3 of the best possible ones you can have. Now keep in mind, and this is kind of the sad part, you also need to spend these every single time you reroll. So I'm spending 20 right now for one reroll, and then for the next reroll, I also have to spend another 20. So it actually racks up really, really fast. That said, at least it gives you some way of holding on to the best effects that you can get. Okay, so that's how you reroll. The next question is probably, what effects should I actually get then? Okay, and this is kind of something that depends a bit on the character, but generally, if you have portraits that you equip on a character, you might know, for example, that speed is really good on basically every single character as like a buffer or a debuffer or a breaker, for example. So of course that means they also want to have that as their special effect in here, right? They might also want to have speed in here. Or you might know that for some people the MP portrait is really good, which is also buffers, debuffers, sometimes breakers as well. So yeah, give them MP recovery rate. That's simple. So already we know, okay, speed and recovery rate pretty good for basically everyone. Then on top of all of that, you know, for example, oh, attackers, they want attack, so give them attack percentage right here. This one's one of the best ones for the attackers. Another one that's really good for the attackers is of course the elemental one. So for example here, the one that's for dark attack. Like I said at the beginning of this, if you want to get these specific elemental gems, you need to actually make sure that you go to the strengthening quest of that particular element. So for Homoda, for example, that's why I'm farming the dark element window for these, so that I can hopefully get a yellow quality Chaos++ gem, so I can use that one instead. And then the third one, for most characters, you're going to use the EX crystal right? But not for all of them. For example, Homoda's EX Crystal is not actually that great, specifically on single target. It's okay on multi-target. But for example, on her, there's another one that's really, really good, which is another crystal that increases the damage dealt to elemental weakness. Which of course means you're kind of locking into elemental weakness, but it's also a really nice damage bonus that you can use for your damage dealers. And as far as like attackers are concerned, these are like the three that you would use, which is the percentage attack, the elemental percent, and then either the EX or elemental weakness for attackers. Keep in mind, you want the elemental, the attack percent. Now, this has already been a bit of a confusion for some people, because I've had other videos in the past and I've generally talked about how incredibly powerful base attack is, right? Base attack is the attack that you see right here next to your character, and this attack scales extremely well into damage. However, the attack that you get from Crystalis is not base attack. So if you see right here, this thing gives plus 20 attack. This is not plus 20 base attack. This is plus 20 flat attack that gets added at the very end of the entire damage calculation, which means it's basically useless, right? It also doesn't even get increased by the attack percentage. So this 25% attack up doesn't even apply to the 20 attack. So you have your entire base attack plus the percentage attack, and you have then your base damage that arrives from that, and only from there you get plus 20. Which is nothing, which is actually nothing, because my Homoda has like 9,000 attack in a battle, and if you think, okay, I have 9,000 attack, plus 20, there's nothing, come on. So generally the flat attack on this is kind of bad, you kind of don't want this. That said, it's not useless either, because it's still better than nothing, okay, it's still better than nothing, but generally flat attack is kind of pointless in here. Basically the same way it works in the Hoyoverse games, where flat attack on equipment items is actually really bad, like on the relics, for example. Okay, now for other characters, what is there? So for example, that you can actually look at the list once again, and you can also make some choices based on what you think that your team needs. For example, there's one specific one that I want to give everyone on their attack, on their defenders and on their healers. Defenders and healers need to keep the party alive. So you have this one right here, which decreases all allies damage taken, which scales based on how many enemies there are, up to 8%, but there's also a second one that scales based on how few enemies there are. And most of the time, I would say get the one that scales with how few enemies there are, and then take this into really tough boss fights with you. So this is something that, of course, you want to have healer defender, but theoretically, you could also use this on a buffer, on a debuffer, on a breaker, for example, just to keep the party alive. Because we believe that this stacks, but we don't know for certain. But if this stacks right here, that can give you a lot of damage reduction for your entire team. Right? Other than that, for example, of course, defenders want defense. Healers want HP, right? And on top of that, they also want HP recovery amount. So already that's 2 of your slots filled. And the third one is going to be the EX in most cases, right? Speed, once again, also really good for defenders and for your healers. On top of all of that, like I said, if the gems didn't break when you put them out, you could actually swap them back in and out depending on what you need for each boss. Because if there was a boss where you notice that your healer is like slightly behind the boss or slightly ahead of the boss, you could swap your stats around a little bit to line this turns up better. But sadly right now you can't do that. But in the future you could, where you could then swap around some of your gems. I mentioned this also in another video, don't get Break Effect. Break Effect is absolutely useless. I don't know why it's still here. I don't know why they're doing anything with it. Break Effect is entirely pointless right now. Hopefully they actually change something about Break Effect in the future, because this is entirely pointless. Don't ever use Break Effect on anyone. It's a trap. But there is one more that I want to point out as well. There's this one right here. There's 2 Indomitable Endurance and Focus Endurance, which are similar to the damage reduction ones, which scale either with how few or with how many enemies there are. And this is ailment resistance. The reason why this is important is because there's a lot of really powerful bosses, especially chaos bosses, for example, the first chaos boss, that works entirely around applying ailments to your party. But if you were to say, for example, I'm struggling really hard with this chaos boss, so I'm just going to use this one, and then it's possible that I'm just going to randomly not get hit by that ailment, and then suddenly the fight becomes much easier. That said, even when they are of yellow quality, it only goes up to like 30%, which isn't that high. And even the portraits only give like 15%, so it's not actually that much, but it can be the X factor in some cases to help you out. And if you need to apply ailments yourself, there's also one for ailment hit rate. For example, if you have a Nemu who wants to apply ailments, although I probably wouldn't give it to her because her ailments aren't that powerful, or you have a Ren, for example, that wants to apply her ailments and you don't have her A2 yet, then you can also give her the ailment hit rate right here to make that happen more likely. There's also another one right here, which might also be somewhat interesting sometimes, which is the debuff resistance. Now, debuff resistance, as it says, gives you a chance to not get hit by an enemy debuff, and you can actually get quite a lot of this because the highest rarity one of this is like 50%, no, 48%, sorry, 48% chance to have a debuff not hit you, which sounds really good, and it is. There are not that many fights that have really powerful debuffs, but it can help you out. That said, having more output on your character, like more speed, more MP, more attack, more defense, whatever, is usually better, but keep in mind that you don't forget about this. If some point in the future you fight against a boss that has really powerful debuffs, the fact that there are gems like this exist, especially when, like I said, hopefully they at some point make it so these don't break when you swap them out, this will be an absolutely vital effect to have on the backhand somewhere to know that you can slot this in. And conversely, there's also one that gives you debuff hit rate. Now, right now, this isn't that important because there aren't many bosses in the game that even have debuff resistance. I think there's only 2, and one of them is a chaos boss. But if there are going to be more bosses in the future that have debuff resistance, then having someone have debuff hit rate might be really important. For example, your Ren applies a lot of debuffs, for example. Any debuffer, as the name implies, applies a lot of debuffs. And if you're fighting against bosses that have really high debuff resistance in the future, then of course you can swap in something like here with debuff hit rate that on highest rarity goes up to 50%, which makes it a lot more likely to actually hit all of those debuffs. Same thing with ailment rate here as well, as you can see on screen. And as far as main stats are concerned, there's one last one that I want to make very specific mention of, and that is the fact that you can also, of course, get some crit going. So there's both a critical hit rate and a critical hit damage node you can get. And for the most part, normal attackers, when I say normal, I mean attackers that aren't specifically supposed to crit all the time, like Homura, for example, because she doesn't care too much about crit, right? Those characters shouldn't really worry too much about using crit from this system, but there are characters, of course, that do want to crit more often, like, for example, Yachio. Yachio is the prime example for that. Or Madokami, because Madokami also gives herself crit rate and crit damage bonuses, so she wants to crit more often and she gets bonuses when you crit more often, right? So characters that do gain bonuses from critting more often or that already have bonuses to crit might want to look into either getting some main stat crit, or as you're going to see in a second, some substat crit. And for example, Madokami, she gains an EX passive where she gains 15% crit, and then if you were to give the yellow rarity for direct hit, that's another 12% crit rate, so you can get a lot of crit rate and also 20% crit damage from these effects. That said, even for characters like that, even for characters like Madokami and Yachio, you need to be careful, because if you already have a lot of crit rate, because you have a Tsuruno support, for example, at some point you actually need to do some damage with those crits, so 25% attack up might actually still be better, as well as the 20% from the elemental damage might still be better than something like 12% crit rate. So keep all of that in mind, that even though you can build that, you don't have to. And now finally, just a quick overview of which substats you might want to actually build. So there's of course flat attack in your substats. You don't really care about flat attack in most cases, but it's also nothing that is like a dead stat. Like, it's a stat that still helps you in a way, but it's not something that you primarily are looking for. As far as damage dealers are concerned, like attackers, what I mean with that, you specifically want crit rate and crit damage. Now, even if you have an attacker like Homura, for example, who doesn't really have any crit rate buffs or anything like that, only has like 10% crit rate for 20% crit damage, it is still overall a damage increase, of course, if you can crit more often and if you have more ways of critting harder as well. So this is probably the best thing that you want to do as far as attackers are concerned with critting. And then after you have good crit rate and crit damage, what is the third effect gonna be? Well, it could be flat attack, but personally, I think it's better to go for something like speed. Because yes, you can actually get speed as a substat, but it's somewhat rare because it only has 4 ranks to it instead of 10. Like, every single other one of these effects has 10 different ranks to it. Speed only has 4, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4 speed respectively. But if I were to have +4 speed on every single one of my Crystalis, that's +12 speed, which is pretty alright. That's like plus 12 speed, that's pretty darn good. So that's something that you might want to look into. Other than that, you don't have to go for speed on your attacker. You can still go for the flat attack, which goes all the way up to 60, which is still a decent way to improve your damage, even if it's, in my opinion, not the best. On top of all of that, once again, you can go for something like debuff resistance, because debuff resistance can also be rolled from here in, and you can also get defense and HP. Specifically, the HP can be somewhat interesting because attackers don't have a lot of HP and they don't have a lot of defense. So you can get up to plus 45 defense from this, which doesn't sound like much, but can be the difference, and up to plus 420 HP. And personally, I would say if you want to make your attackers more tanky because maybe they're dying too often, if you get like plus 420 HP on every single one of your Crystalis, that is a lot of HP that your attacker now suddenly has. So that's one thing that you can spec into. These are basically all of the main ones that you want to use on your attacker. Now, as far as other characters are concerned, it's basically just speed that they're really that interested in. Like, for example, breakers, they just want speed. Yeah, theoretically there's break effect in here that you can get, but don't get break effect. It's absolutely a wasted stat. It's better instead to say, okay, I'm gonna get more HP and defense, for example, or debuff resistance for my breakers instead. So yeah, definitely get speed, get all the speed you can for basically every single character on every single substat. But other than that, HP and defense keeps you alive. Debuff resistance might be really good on some bosses as well. Those are like the main stats, substats that I would go for. There's not really much else as far as substats go, by the way. The only other substats in here that are generally interesting in some cases is the fact that HP recovery amount is also a substat. So of course, on your healer should of course have HP recovery as a substat on every single one of your Crystalis, because that's extremely important. Defender, of course, also just goes defense on everything, but that's obvious, right? There's also, interesting enough, debuff hit rate in the substats, but apart from maybe some defenders that might struggle otherwise applying debuffs against enemies with high debuff resistance, I guess, yeah, if you have a debuffer, debuffers want to have debuff hit rate, but it's not something that's going to be that important until the developers decide to put more bosses in the game that actually have debuff resistance. But yeah, that still means that for debuffers outside of speed, defense and HP, you might also want to go for debuff hit rate. And one last thing aside note, because I know people are going to ask it, what is ongoing damage? Because there's one gem somewhere that says something about increases ongoing damage. There it is. This is damage over time effect. This is simply what Exedra calls damage over time effect, is ongoing damage. So poison, burn, those kinds of effects. That's ongoing damage. Okay, one last thing before I end this video. I did mention that, yeah, you want to get the EX crystal and then 2 legendary gems, like the yellow gems right here, but this is something only for longer term investment. Let's say, for example, I'm just building this mummy, and I said earlier, yeah, buffers, debuffs, etc. Most of them want speed and MP recovery rate. So if I had all 3 slots, I would just put these in there right here on purple rarity, and I would be done. Like, I could actually say that I'm done with mummy, even though I've only been farming for a single day, because I got lucky with the EX, and I also got lucky with both the quick step and the mana infusion right here. So I could actually just put in the speed, put in the MP recovery rate, all on purple rarity, and I've already gotten a lot out of the system. Like, this mine would already be much better than without the system. And as far as substats are concerned, I wouldn't be worrying too much about locking various effects. I would just re-roll without locking until I get like speed +2, +3 or +4 on any of these, and then I would just move on to the next. You do not have to get absolutely everything out of this. Like, even though I've given you a list of things that are really good, you don't need to maximize everything. Like, for example, as far as supports like buffers and debuffers are concerned, if you just have +4 speed on one of these boost effects, that's perfect. Who cares what the other 2 effects are? Like I said, yeah, defense and HP, but if it isn't, yeah, then so what? It's really not that big of a deal, okay? Keep that in mind. Getting the absolute most 100% out of the system is for longer term investment when you're playing the game for multiple months. For now, it's okay if it's just purple rarity, if it's okay if it's just one good effect on the substats. Don't stress too hard, okay? So that was it. I hope I was able to help you, and if you enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time.